Mario Ruggiero was shot 5 times early this morning at Northwestern University. Police say the suspect also tried to run over the professor with his car. Ruggiero suffered gunshots to the leg and wrist during the attack near Northwestern University housing, and the shooting may be traced to a dispute with Professor Ruggiero over Minnesota research. University of Minnesota police say Costalupes may have returned to Minnesota, and they're worried about the safety of other University of Minnesota professors.
In this campus building, where the biggest excitement usually involves chemical reactions, this respected professor got himself involved in something else that turned explosive in a personal way. W. Ronald Gentry says he had a romantic relationship with his secretary, Jenny May, after he separated from his wife in 1990. It was a brief relationship that turned sour, and then, he says, turned violently obsessive. Channel 5 obtained court documents that detail Gentry's own fears of May. In one incident, he says, she damaged his office furniture, threw supplies at him, punched and kicked him in a 5-minute tirade. He quoted her as saying over the phone, "Just watch your head because I'm going to blow it off."
At first, the woman reportedly demanded to see President Hasselmo. When she couldn't see him right away, she became agitated.
She came in and was extremely upset and was screaming, apparently. But nobody seems to have understood what the issue was or the particular incident that may have set her off.
She then pulled a gun out of her purse and reportedly fired a shot into the ceiling. Freddie and Yvonne were together on and off for 10 years. Family members say at times she truly loved him.
I thought I knew him, and I didn't think that he could ever hurt my mother like that. I thought he loved my mother.
Yesterday, that relationship ended in an abrupt and brutal way. Police say Freddie murdered Yvonne, then for 6 hours he held a gun to his own head. It ended with police trying to distract him with a flashbang, a puff of smoke. Officers say Freddie pulled and aimed his gun. Police fired and killed him.
I didn't think she had anything to be afraid of.
Yvonne's family didn't notice any signs of abuse over the 10 years.
But she knew something that I didn't, that she knew was inside.
Andre thought his mom was safe. Now his only hope is that other women will learn from this, learn what can happen.
34-year-old Michael Scott Moeller has an 8-year history with the DNR, but what he learned on the job was enough to scare authorities. The Green Isle, Minnesota native started in 1988, working as a seasonal laborer, spending much of his time as a turkey trapper with the Wildlife Division. But in the last 3 years, Moeller worked in trails and waterways, sometimes using explosives. At times, he worked out of the Metro headquarters. Yesterday, at those headquarters, authorities say Moeller confronted a DNR employee in the parking lot at 6:30 a.m. using terroristic threats. At 9 a.m., investigators say Moeller returned to the parking lot at DNR headquarters, starting a fire in the lot with more threats. Public safety authorities learned of the threats and Moeller's background. They closed DNR offices until they found Moeller at this Stillwater address early this morning. They arrested Moeller and impounded his truck, believed to contain weapons.
It was just overwhelming. And everybody is talking about what kind of a memorial can we create to him. He was truly an outstanding human being.
Governor Carlson knew Timothy Bowe well. Bowe once served on the elite team of officers in charge of protecting the governor and his family.
Everything he did very, very well. He was a very hard-working, very diligent person. But more than that, he cared a lot.
Bowe was helping Chisago County deputies here this weekend trying to capture a shooting suspect when that suspect fired a shot that hit him in the chin. Deputies then returned fire and killed the man.
Unfortunately, most of us have become all too familiar with news stories about violence. But what makes the stories we've just seen even more striking is that they all deal with violent incidents involving public employees and public workplaces right here in Minnesota. For some of you, the stories are personal, since you may have been acquainted with or even worked with some of these people. So what are the signs of potential violence? How can you be safe at work, and do you know how and when to report an incident? I'm Kathy Wurzer from KTCA-TV, and we're going to spend the next 2 hours talking with a number of the state's top workplace and personal safety experts about situations like these and find out also how we can help prevent workplace violence. The goal of this program is to help prevent violence in the public workplace. Now, violence might originate from total strangers or from customers, clients, students, or co-workers. Violent domestic relationships can also spill over into the workplace. This program will look at the workplace violence from all of these sources. We'll learn steps we can take to reduce the potential for violence and learn some of the indicators of potentially violent behavior. We'll hear about our responsibilities for providing a workplace free of threats or acts of violence and about the importance of reporting incidents or threats. We'll also learn strategies for keeping anger, our own and that of others, from escalating. And you'll leave with a list of personal safety tips. Today's broadcast is being received by over 2,000 public employees at 90 sites provided by Minnesota counties and state colleges and universities. It's the result of a partnership among 11 state agencies and the Minnesota Counties Insurance Trust. Now, you each should have an information packet much like this. We'll be referring to specific items in your packet throughout today's program, so you want to keep it handy for you. If you have any specific issues you'd like addressed today or have questions for any of our speakers, phone us at 1-800-657-3677, or you can fax us. That number is 1-800-657-3678. We'll try to answer those questions a little later on in the program. Well, our first guest is Lieutenant Governor Jo Ann Benson. Lieutenant Governor Benson has provided leadership in the state's efforts on violence prevention. In 1995, she established the Violence Prevention Interagency Task Force, which helps state agencies develop workplace violence prevention policies and other initiatives. Also with us this morning, Don Davis. He, of course, is the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, also the former Brooklyn Park Chief of Police for 17 years, and Chief of the South Lake Minnetonka Public Safety Department. He served as a part-time faculty member in the law enforcement program at North Hennepin Community College. Welcome to both of you. What I'm going to do, I think, is start with Lieutenant Governor Jo Ann Benson first. And I want to know, why is the state so interested in workplace violence prevention?
Well, of course, violence affects all of us, and we all have a responsibility to do something about it. For instance, when I was in Brussels, Belgium on a trade mission recently, we had heard there from people about the impact of violence in Minnesota because they were getting information about Murderapolis. That is not the kind of reputation we want for the state of Minnesota. It affects us economically. It certainly affects us because we have this fear and the lack of safety. We don't want that in our communities and our workplaces. And violence is also costly to the state.
How so?
When you think about the human cost, first of all, of suffering and grief that we go through, but also the cost in terms of prisons that we build, the costs of the judicial system and law enforcement, and then, of course, the lack of resources that we have because we're spending on that, the lack of resources we have to spend on things we would like to spend on our children and on education and other things. So that's a huge cost to all of us.
Commissioner, when we talk about violence, and in fact, the statistics are really pretty amazing. There are 1,000 work-related assaults reported per year in the state of Minnesota. I was really surprised to hear that. When we talk about violence in the workplace, what are we talking about specifically?
Kathy, violence can run the gamut from something as basic as two employees in a verbal confrontation with each other to the point of escalation where they may assault one another. It can work all the way up to the level of homicides. Nationwide, I think it's appalling that in the workplace, more females die of homicide than any other cause. With males, it's the third leading cause of death in the workplace. And in Minnesota, we tend to regard ourselves as very safe. As the Lieutenant Governor just alluded to, we take pride in the fact we have put into effect some good policies. But of the 1,000 reported, what concerns me are those that may not be reported.
When we hear about workplace violence, such as in news reports, I think there's a fear factor that it's coworker to coworker often. Is that necessarily the case? Who's affected?
The majority of the time, it could be coworkers taking animosities out toward one another. However, as was alluded to a moment ago, increasingly relationships outside the workplace are spilling over into the workplace. It could be clients whom we're attempting to serve as public employees. It could be students who are attempting to enter a college. Maybe they don't have the credentials to be there. There could be dissatisfaction with a grade, dissatisfaction with an instructor. So it comes from the full variety of all those people with whom we deal. We have to be alert to our workers, our friends, our relatives.
What does state policy say about workplace violence prevention?
Well, it says that we all have the right to feel safe and be safe in our own workplace. And we started that task force with an interagency violence prevention task force, and we've been working very, very diligently on this. We also have some other things that are taking place, and then I'll get to the answer about what that policy actually states, because we want to get it right word for word. We worked very hard on each and every word.
I'm sure you did.
The media campaign that we're doing that goes along with it is "You're the one who can make the peace," and I'm very pleased that that's the slogan for this conference today. And this is the information packet that we're sending out to people. You're the one who can make the peace. And what that really says to us is that every day, each and every one of us have actions that we take, whether it's cutting someone off or not in traffic or whatever, that says, you know, we can either work towards peace or we can add to the violence. And we want to do an ad campaign that reminds people that every day we can do something to add to the peace. Workplace violence prevention policies and plans are very important to us, but the legislature also took action. When I was in the legislature, in fact, we passed this. It's a zero tolerance of violence. We just don't want any. But it is state policy that every person in the state has a right to live free from violence. And furthering that policy, we mandate that each agency of state government adopts the goal of zero tolerance of violence in the workplace. Each agency is also encouraged to develop a plan that describes how the agency will do that, how they will seek to eliminate any potential for violence in and around the agency workplace, and also how they will seek to eliminate any potential for violence by affecting the attitudes and behavior of the people that the agency serves or regulates. And the definition of violence, which we worked hard at, the violence is words and actions that hurt people. It is abusive or unjust exercise of power, intimidation, harassment, and or the threatened or actual use of force, which results in or has a high likelihood of causing hurt, fear, injury, suffering, or death. In the definition of violence prevention, we also talk about how can we do the opposite, how can we build the assets. So the asset-based programs or services that promote health or social well-being and the development of nurturing support systems, also improving the security and workplace environment in state facilities. So those are the things that we're working on in Minnesota.
And all this is quite clear to employees. It's all employee handbooks and the like.
We have asked each department and agency to actually develop theirs. We have models that they can work from, and Darcel Lewis has been working very diligently, and I know that she'll be talking later about that. But then each department and agency has to put their own flavor to it because each one has different issues. And then they send it back, we review it, and then, yes, they have to do something with it.
Now, Commissioner, it's clear that there is a concrete state policy surrounding workplace violence.
Absolutely.
What happens, though, when you start talking about incidents, potential incidents? If I'm a state employee and if I'm sensing I'm in a dangerous situation or something is happening that is going against policy, what do I do about that?
Our zero tolerance policy requests, directs, asks the employee, the manager, the supervisor, whoever that employee is, that he or she should report this as soon as possible. It could be the feeling of an uncomfortable setting in your workplace. It could be a threat which you have received as an employee, but it's imperative that we know the date, the time, the location. Maybe you witnessed an incident or maybe you've received the threat, who made the threat, who or what kinds of property were threatened, exactly what was said, what happened as a result of these actions. Were weapons mentioned or were weapons seen? A weapon could be anything from a club, a bat, up to a firearm. Were vehicles involved? So anytime anybody feels uncomfortable, they have witnessed something, they receive a call, report it. Please report it immediately.
Who investigates?
This goes back to each department. Each department has or should have in place its protocol for examining these complaints. And if a department is not sure, we at Public Safety, because of our function, would be glad to assist in that endeavor. And we did provide assistance in the case with the Department of Natural Resources last year.
Again, going back to reporting, and you had made the comment earlier, Commissioner, about you are worried about those incidents that are not reported.
Right.
Is there possibly a fear that employees don't wish to cry wolf or fear of retaliation? How do you overcome something like that?
I think that's a natural feeling, Kathy, and maybe it's co-workers. Maybe I've been working side by side with Joanne and I sense something's wrong and I may have a hesitancy to notify the supervisor. I think something is bothering Joanne. I would really encourage employees to exercise good professional discretion. Be concerned about your coworker, be concerned about his or her family, be concerned for your own safety. I would rather err on the side of caution than not to have received that notice at all.
There's a lot that has been done thus far on this issue, but what do you two both see? What more could be done on the state level?
Well, I think bringing attention to the issue is very important. I think it's something we don't want to really face. And so talking about it, doing it within agencies and doing it within small groups of people within departments is helpful, but also the attention that we can bring to it at a statewide level. I mean, I think that we have to balance the worry that we have and the fear with the overwhelming bit of information. That is, we do usually feel safe in Minnesota. We want to keep people having a positive feeling as well. And so we like to bring attention to the good and positive things that people are doing, which is why I started another thing a few years ago. This is the third year that Minnesota will be giving out Minnesota Peace Prize to people, an individual, a young person, an adult, and maybe an organization that is doing something very positive in Minnesota to promote peace. And that is why in this same ad campaign, we're promoting the positive things people can do every day. And it is a positive thing for a person to take responsibility and, as the commissioner said, really say something to someone if you feel uncomfortable.
You have the last word, Commissioner.
How can we get the word out? I really applaud this particular effort. I think this is an excellent, excellent vehicle by which we can disseminate the information, the policies to the employees. And I just hope, like other good training, be it harassment, the hostile work environment, technologies we utilize in our work environment, this message has to be repeated and repeated. Let's not end just with today's fine show and the information. Let's make sure it's an ongoing process for all of our employees.
Well said. Thank you much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, coming up next, we're going to be talking about responsibility, the responsibilities both managers and employees have to keep the workplace safe. First, remember that quiz that we told you about earlier? Well, we sent Tim Price from the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities out to survey a few of your colleagues about the quiz we asked you to look at earlier. Here's what some of them had to say.
Good morning, Karen.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. The policies and practices of an organization can help to prevent workplace violence. Do you believe that's true or false?
I'd say that's a true statement. An organization can provide training for their employees and helps them be more aware to situations and also increase their respect that you have for your customers. I think that always creates more safety.
Teresa, I have a statement I'd like you to respond to if you would. Employees should report all incidents of threat or harassment that they observe or experience, no matter how unimportant the incident appears to be. Is that a true or false statement?
I feel that's a true statement. We should encourage our employees to report all types of threatening, harassing, or violent type of incidents. And if they are in doubt, they should report it anyways.
Well, we are back, and joining us right now, John Shabatura. He is with the Minnesota Department of Employee Relations. He happens to be the Deputy Commissioner for Labor Relations, representing the state and its relations with the unions, including matters of workplace safety. Also with us, Pete Benner. Pete is the Executive Director of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Council 6. That is the largest union representing state employees. John, I'm going to start with you first. When we talk about responsibilities, especially for managers, what is that when we start talking about workplace violence and preventing workplace violence?
Well, the state of Minnesota and the Department of Employee Relations in particular have a very strong commitment to establishing, maintaining, and fostering a workplace environment that's free of violence, free of threats of violence. This is the responsibility not only of employees, but of managers and supervisors as well.
And how does that manifest itself?
It manifests itself in the policies which the Department of Employee Relations and the legislature have promulgated to ensure a violence-free workplace. It's manifested in the behavior of supervisors and managers towards their employees, towards one another, and really towards everyone in the public sector workplace. It's the responsibility really of every manager, every supervisor at the state to clearly communicate to everyone, employees and one another, what the expectations are in terms of maintaining a favorable workplace environment. Managers and supervisors also need to be very cognizant of what hazards exist in the workplace, from potential violent people from outside, from clients or customers, and in some cases, even from employees. In particular, all supervisors can take action all the time by modeling appropriate behavior in the workplace, being aware of their own potential for anger, their own ability to behave appropriately in the workplace, and being really an example for all the people with whom they work. And finally, maybe most importantly of all, we expect and hope that every supervisor will be able to foster an atmosphere of cooperation, of caring for each employee, for treating them as an individual, for really maintaining an environment where people can work together harmoniously and effectively.
We heard about managers, Pete. From the employee point of view, responsibilities if I am a state employee when it comes to the issues of workplace violence, keeping my workplace safe.
A number of things. For the contracts for this coming year, we have put in the normal safety article that incidents of workplace violence are to be reported, just like any other safety problem be reported. So this should be treated no differently than an ergonomics problem, a bad tools, bad equipment problem. We think employees need to spend some time with their supervisors taking an inventory of what the most likely types of workplace violence are where they work. In some cases that might be a client, in some cases that might be a customer, in some cases that might be a patient. In other cases, the most likely type of violence you're going to run across is a coworker, a family problem. And I guess just to echo what John is saying, there really is an issue of all of us dealing with our own anger, our own tendencies towards rage sometime, and that we should not be bringing that into the workplace with us. All of us have to learn how to lower the temperature where we work.
How have the relationships been going when it comes to reporting? We talked earlier, as you've probably heard, with Commissioner Davis about maybe fears on the part of employees to report incidents, you know, crying wolf, that sort of thing. How are you working with workers and management to try to smooth that out?
That's a very valid concern. We do encourage employees to report whenever there's a situation where they have perceived violent behavior or where they feel threatened. In some cases, they may not be comfortable going directly to their own supervisor. In some very rare cases, the supervisors themselves might be the person who they find threatening. And in that case, we've set up procedures where they're expected to go to other individuals, such as the manager of the agency in which they work.
And Pete?
We're learning. We're starting on this. I think an employee who feels threatened should not eat it. They should make the report. Supervisors, by and large, are adequately trained or sufficiently trained that that we can sort out the incident that does not need action from the ones that do need some sort of intervention by management. And the union has an ability to file grievances if somebody feels they've been inappropriately disciplined, inappropriately dealt with for something they did. So if an employee feels threatened from whatever source, they should report it. Our joint local labor management committees or safety committees, once we start dealing with this as part of our regular agenda, I think we're going to get good at it. We'll know which ones we can deal with quickly. We'll know which ones need more extensive intervention.
And of course, John, final word, it's a matter of trust, is it not, between supervisor and employee?
Very much so. And it, again, is the responsibility of every supervisor, every manager, to foster an organizational climate where that trust is present and where employees can feel free to bring forward those concerns that they have in the workplace.
John Chabatura and Pete Benner, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, up next, what makes for a safe, nonviolent workplace and what creates an unhealthy place to work? A reminder to get your questions ready. We'll include them in a panel discussion coming up shortly. First, though, a look at those quiz questions.
Tom, When an incident of violence occurs in the workforce, the supervisor is the person who needs to know exactly what to do. Is that true or false?
I believe that is false. All employees should know what to do in case an incident of violence does occur. You never know what kind of situation is going to occur and when, and you don't know who's going to be around. It might be yourself out there, and that especially can occur in my line of work where you're out there by yourself and customers or something, the situation may come up where you may be the only one that may be able to handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Joni.
Good morning.
Can you share with us a few of the things that you think a person can do in interacting with customers that can reduce the incidence of violence in the workplace?
Sure, simply by taking the time to greet your customers positively and by making them feel important, listening to their questions, even though it might have been the 100th time that day you've heard that same question. And by using good customer service skills, all of those things should certainly help to create a safer work environment.
Well, up next, Carol Sullivan is with us. Carol is a trainer and consultant to schools and government agencies across the U.S. and Canada. She has 22 years in violence prevention. She's a specialist in the treatment, consultation, and program development in violence prevention. Carol, welcome.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot of different information thus far this morning about workplace violence and state policy and the like, but I want to know first from you, when we talk about healthy and unhealthy workplaces, we'll start with healthy workplaces, why are they so important?
We're all in this together, Kathy. What happens in the workplace affects the family. What happens in the family affects the community. And people who are working in an unhealthy environment suffer on a daily basis, with the cumulative effects having a long-term and disturbing impact on their lives. For example, a person who experiences emotional abuse at work is more likely to be abusive at home or while driving. And people who treat each other in a shaming and disrespectful manner at work are also likely to treat clients and customers in the same way, which could also trigger an incident of violence. Therefore, working in an unhealthy work environment can lead to violence and even homicide.
How do you then create a workplace that's free from violence, that is safe and healthy?
Well, in order to do so, we first must look at the role of the workplace culture in the occurrence of violence. And it's important to remember that there are several factors that create an unhealthy work environment. It's not simply the outcome of abusive or authoritarian management. It's about systemic dysfunction, with all members feeling disempowered.
So there's when you talk about systemic reasons, I want to go back to leadership, though, because you mentioned that that's just one of the keys. When it comes to dynamics between a supervisor and workers, if that's unhealthy, talk about that, the pull and tug.
Well, in an unhealthy work environment, leadership is either authoritarian or there may be a lack of leadership. Rules are rigid and inflexible, or there may be no rules and lack of structure. Oftentimes you'll find a work environment where there's been a lack of structure, and in order to try to correct the problems, rules become rigid, and that obviously doesn't work. So basically that's the type of situation that people are in.
Other characteristics of an unhealthy workplace. Anything else to pass along?
Well, when you look at what happens between employees and management, you'll find a lot of belittling, a lot of shaming, disrespect, that there's a lack of communication. Communication is often one way, or there's no communication at all. There's a general indifference between, an indifference in the way people are treated.
What about problem solving? You know, how does, when someone finally wants to work on the situation and it comes to problem solving, are there problems when you're in an unhealthy work situation?
People, first of all, because they don't know how to communicate, they don't know how to resolve problems.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of disruption in what's happening in that environment.
Let's talk and move on to, we have tape, as I understand it, okay, about when we start talking about unhealthy work environments. You want to explain this for us?
Right, we'll be showing tape from Theater at Work that shows the characteristics of an unhealthy work environment.
Okay, so we can kind of illustrate this for
Right.
us. Okay, great. Why don't we roll that tape?
Angela, I hope you're in a good mood. I need these folded and sorted by 4 o'clock.
Matt, that's only 45 minutes from now. I'm trying to get this report done for Eleanor.
I understand, but I want you to make this your top priority. It's for Feldman. He was supposed to get it yesterday.
All right. Just how exactly do you want these folded?
Look, do I have to walk you through everything around here? Take some initiative. I don't have time to explain every little thing. This is a really busy time for me.
Matt, I just need to know.
I've got things to do by 4 o'clock.
This is Angela. Oh, Ben, look, this is really a busy time. Is anything wrong? Why is Adam yelling? Tell him to be quiet so I can hear you. Ben, we do not say shut up in our family. Now, what did you call about? What can you have for a snack? How many times have I told you not to call me at work unless there's a problem? You know how to make a sandwich, don't you? There's cheese and peanut butter in the fridge. I haven't had time to go shopping. Look, you and your brother are old enough to figure this out without bothering me at work and without having to fight about it. Now don't call me again unless there's blood. I love you too. See you tonight.
I give you a simple task, and not only does it take you forever, you can't even do it right. You put it together like this. You fold it, and you fold it, and you fold it, and you fold it. You turn it over, and you fold it, and you fold it, and you fold it, and you fold it, and you crease it again, and then it's done. A child could figure this out.
This is Angela. Oh, hello, Mr. Feldman. Yes, Matt's right here. We're working on your order right now.
Let me handle this. Mr. Feldman, Matt here. How you doing? I know. Well, didn't Angela call you? Well, I asked her to call you to explain what happened. You see, there was a mix-up in the color shipments, but we've got it under control now. Take it easy, Frank. We'll have it to you by 4:30. All right? Okay. Angela, I thought I could depend on you. I expect you to do what I ask when it really counts.
Look, Matt, I don't appreciate you blaming me for all this. Anyway, what was that bullshit about you asking me to call Feldman about the color shipments?
Don't worry about that. The point is, I needed this done and you've messed it up.
Well, maybe I could have figured it out if my kids hadn't called me the minute you walked out of the room.
Well, if you weren't on the phone with your kids all the time, maybe you'd get some work done around here.
I don't need to hear this right now, Matt.
Hey, I know you've stressed out since your divorce, but when you're here at work, I expect you to be here. If you can't have your head in the game, maybe you should get out. I can't even use these now. Do you realize what this is going to cost the company? Now do it the way I showed you, and do it fast.
This is Angela. Adam, I told your brother that you two are not to call me. You did what? You broke a window in the living room? Do you realize what that is going to cost me? What the hell were you doing? His eye is cut. What do you mean? Where's he bleeding? So it's his eyelid? Oh my God. All right, listen, honey. I want you to tell Ben to lie down and stay still. Give him a washcloth to put over his eye, okay? And call Mrs. Martins next door. I want her to wait with you until I get there. I'll be there as soon as I can, all right? Bye.
Interesting tape.
Mm-hmm.
Learned a lot
Very
from
much
that.
so.
Mm-hmm. I want to skip now to a healthy environment.
Mm-hmm.
What is a healthy work environment like?
Well, in a healthy environment, everyone feels respected and valued. Therefore, the potential of violence decreases significantly.
And what about, again, we brought up leadership structure in an unhealthy environment. How about in a healthy environment?
Well, the rules are clear, and people understand what the rules are. People know what the rules are. They're made to protect employees. And they're humane, they're mutable and realistic. They're flexible when they're flexible when flexibility is appropriate.
Right. Okay. In terms of problem solving, again, another thing that was brought up in fairness when we start talking about issues in the workplace, how about problem solving in a healthy environment?
Well, in a healthy environment, people, because again, communication is open, they complement each other, they work together, they reinforce each other's strengths and assets.
So kind of more of an open system?
Right, definitely. The system is open. It's open to change, growth, and creativity.
And I'm assuming there isn't a fear factor.
There's no fear of retaliation or recrimination.
Okay. As a manager, when you're in a healthy situation, and I've had the opportunity to work in some situations like this. I've run into managers before who, and you've run into this too, when some managers will refuse to acknowledge any mistakes, that sort of thing in a healthy environment.
Management admit their mistakes, and employees know that it's okay to make mistakes.
All right.
And people learn from mistakes.
And what about the relationship with management and employees, among management and employees?
Well, management treat employees in a respectful manner, and employees have a sense of their own worth. Management has a sense of their own worth. Employees come away feeling valued.
And what else are we missing here? Actually, you know what? I want to go to a little bit of tape, because we had tape of an unhealthy environment.
Right.
Let's see what actually a positive, healthy environment would look like.
That'd be great.
Let's roll that tape.
Angela, I hope you're in a good mood. These need to be folded and sorted by 4 o'clock.
Matt, that's only 45 minutes from now. I'm trying to get this report done for Eleanor.
I know. I talked to Eleanor. She wants us to make this top priority. Feldman was supposed to get these yesterday.
What happened?
I blew it. There was a mix-up in the color shipments, and I got so busy yesterday I forgot to let Feldman know about it.
Uh-oh, he must be steamed.
Right. But if we get these done by 4, we'll still have his account. Can you help me out?
Sure. Just how exactly do they need to be folded?
Like this.
It's probably my kids. This is Angela. Oh, hey, Ben. Listen, honey, I can't talk right now. I'm finishing up a project. I'll call you back as soon as I'm done. Why is Adam yelling? Yeah, he sounds hungry. I left some cheese and cracker snacks for you in the fridge. Maybe we'll all go shopping later tonight. Listen, you guys take it easy, okay? I'll call you soon. Okay. Bye.
Perfect. Thanks, Angela. I owe you one.
It's important to remember that all workplaces are going to experience difficult times. In respectful workplaces, however, employees, because they're able to communicate, they know that people will make mistakes, and they learn from mistakes. In a respectful environment, people complement each other, they work together, mistakes are quickly attempted to, and attempts made to resolve conflict. In order to create systemic change, what is happening in the unhealthy system needs to first be identified and talked about openly, without blaming, without people being shamed or punished for doing this.
Boy, that's tough.
Right. And people have to move back past the blaming in order to work together and create a healthier work environment. Employees and management must begin supporting each other and creating an environment where people will feel empowered and happy.
Well said. Thank you so much. And you're going to be back later on.
Right.
All right. Well, lots of questions on how we can identify potentially violent people in situations. I'm sure you all have those. And coming up next, we're going to try to answer those in a couple of minutes. First, 2 more quiz questions.
Thank you for taking the time to respond to my questions this morning. I have a statement I'd like you to respond to. There is no way to tell whether a coworker is disgruntled or prone to violence. Do you think that's true or false?
I think that's absolutely false. I think violent people exhibit certain patterns of behavior, and if we're made aware of some of those behaviors, those signs, then we will be better prepared to act on those. However, I do think that some of these patterns or some of these behaviors that people exhibit are the same signs that many of us may exhibit. So we have to be real careful.
Jay, good afternoon. I have a statement that I'd like you to respond to if you would. There is no way to tell if a person is disgruntled or prone to violence. Is that a true or false statement?
That's a false statement. Normally, once people are made aware of what to look for, they can usually spot indicators of potentially violent acts. After a situation occurs, most people can look back and identify certain behaviors which should have made them suspicious. There are certain instances, however, where no clues were present.
Thank you.
You are the one who thought the word that you didn't say, so the fight didn't start, so the knife didn't cut, so the gun didn't shoot, so the man didn't die, so the hate didn't grow, so the night was calm and the peace was kept. You're the one who can make the peace.
Well, we talked about what makes a healthy and an unhealthy work environment. I think we should probably talk now about different indicators when it comes to violence. Who might be most at risk for workplace violence? With us right now, George Demers. And George is with the Minnesota Department of Human Services, St. Peter Regional Treatment Center's worksite security trainer, as a matter of fact. He's been in public agencies for 24 years, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. He's an experienced group counselor. He's a trainer. He's also a critical incident debriefer and a consultant to law enforcement. You have quite a resume, George.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about these indicators for potential violence here. Is there a certain profile that a supervisor can look at and say, I'm seeing different indicators?
Well, actually, the research says there really is no profile per se on a person who might commit violence. What they're saying is if we're going to take a look at it, we may want to take a look at the marital history of a person, the personal history of the individual. These are important ways of maybe judging how they might behave in a critical situation. What I should mention here, what I have is in the handout on page 14, for those of you out there who would like to refer to it, I've kind of clumped different behaviors together that we've seen over the years, and many of the people that we've worked with, many of the agencies who have reported back to us who have had some difficulty with employees. And I'd like to refer to these particular items. Going to the first one, the history of the person, as I mentioned. This is probably the most important thing that we might look at, because some individuals just threaten, they give verbal threats. On the other hand, there are people who follow through with it. And this could be at work, it might even be downtown, where they're fighting with other people, fighting with their neighbors. So when we do an assessment of somebody, what we really need to do is we have to take a look at their personal history of how they deal with violence. So if they're having trouble with their girlfriend, their wives, children, and they're using physical force, then there's always that possibility they may come back to the workplace and use it also.
Interesting.
So it's a wide range of things that we have to look at. The second one that we're going to talk about is job misconduct. And this would be basically where people are just having a lot of problems at work, basically coming to work late, maybe stealing things, pushing people around, and maybe just their reports to the supervisors, the way they treat their customers, clients, where people are always being turned in because of their behavior, being negative, whatever it might be. I want to touch a little bit upon these people. What we found is that people who deal with seem to have the nasty attitudes, they're very negative people. That's the one thing that we find. They're negative, so they're going to be negative to their clients, they're going to be to the customers. Even if they're working at 7-Eleven, they're going to be mean to the people when they walk in.
And that's what you mean by negative?
Yep.
Give an example.
Oh, what do you want?
Oh,
always kind of real pushy and always trying to put people down. And one of the things that we found out with this is basically they have very low self-esteem of themselves. So what might look as somebody who is in control and positive, they're really not. So what they try to do is always put people down and keep them on the defense. The next one is a history of grievances towards the company and workers. They're constantly complaining about other people. A lot of it is even through rumors. Some of the things, we all make mistakes. They'll use those, of course, against us. But if they can't find anything that's legitimate, they'll actually make up a rumor to try to make the other employees look bad, or that customer came in and was rude to me and that's why I did it. So they try to blame other people. Mm-hmm. The next category I put in, and we see this quite often today, is the unwanted romantic relationships. And this happens at work. Unfortunately, we just saw there was one in Eden Prairie 2 days ago, I think it was Monday, where the young man took the young woman and actually killed her.
Very sad. And
took her back to the workplace, but I don't think it really had a lot to do with it. But these are things that we see. The other thing that's interesting about unwanted relationships, again, too, it seems like people who do this, again, it's consistent. there's a history of it. They're always asking people out, and they're used to getting the answer no. They finally will find somebody to go out with them, and they get pushy, they intimidate, they scare people. And we see a lot in the tapes that we view in training, you know, of this happening, and it's real. It happens in real life. People just don't quit. They don't get the answer no.
Or they don't understand no.
Yeah, they don't understand no. That would be a good one. The next one, when we take a look at, is fear reaction amongst the colleagues. This one here, if we go and do a debriefing, we'll find that most of the people they worked with and most of the people in the community were afraid of this individual. The problem with this one is that people always say, it's only Johnny. Johnny's threatening. And they just assume that when he threatens somebody, he's not going to follow through. And as some of the speakers said earlier, we have to take a look at what they're saying, and we have, even though we don't want to respond to it each time and try to put personal safety nets around us, we still got to consider what they're saying. So if a person's always threatening people, scaring people, that's going to probably fit into the type of person we might want to keep an eye out for.
Okay. Good.
The next one would be alcohol and substance abuse. It seems like a lot of these people are loners, and they'll sit downtown at a bar or some other place and they'll start to, you know, use chemicals. It's interesting, one of the things that we find with these people, very few will not warn the people they're going after. Part of the whole thing about violence in the workplace is intimidation, control, trying to make people afraid of them, and they do it through their voice. So they usually tell them, I'm going to get you, I'm going to do such and such. And we'll do a little bit of a role play in a bit here and see how this all works out.
Okay.
But the thing is, when they're downtown and they're drinking, and after they've had a few, they start talking about the company, the people they dislike, and they send out good warning signs. So I think one of the important things that the people out there need to know is that sometimes it's not just the threats at work that we have to be concerned about, but we have to be concerned about some of the threats we might hear in other public places or at somebody's home on who they might attempt to get. And that information should be passed back to the employee so that at least they're aware of it.
Good information.
And actually with the alcohol and chemicals, we find that a lot of them, when they do commit the actual crime, they'll probably be using something. So take that into consideration. Quickly over the next one's feeling of being victimized. These individuals, and we'll just go through all of the different ones up there, but blaming others for their problems and inability to take criticism, it's always somebody else's fault. They feel they're the victim. And so what they want to do is get back at people. They can't take the criticism that a supervisor may give them. In other words, if I'm doing something wrong and you call me in and say, George, the way you behaved today with that customer out there, that's not acceptable. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, Kathy, and going out and changing my behavior, I go out and find somebody and say, you wouldn't believe what Kathy did. She's giving me the dickens for this, and now you're the blame. And so now I target you, I target that customer as people who are against me.
And behavior like this is ongoing then?
Ongoing, it's constant.
We all do this to a certain degree sometimes.
That's correct.
Okay.
But these people always seem to pass it on to everybody else. It's their wife's fault when they get home. Somebody is always at fault with them. The last category I want to cover, which probably sets a lot of the people off in the end, most of the stuff early on is threats, but when we get to the end here of being fired or demoted, sometime what we found, I know we did a workshop with a private company and they talked about just the demotion, telling a guy he was going to lose his job as the front load driver and he was going to work in the warehouse. That can set somebody off also if they've worked many years. And again, they find fault in the employer. And they become upset and they want to challenge them, and it just gets to be threats and all the way to wherever it could end up. So basically what we need to do is take a look at that. When they're fired, usually within 48 hours they'll usually see something happening. And all of these things, if there's a crisis with these individuals, if they're going to respond to somebody, it's usually going to be within the first 48 hours. Okay. Otherwise they'll sort of settle down. The other thing is when somebody's fired and lose their job, it's a pretty important thing to them. And now they lose their job, they've got problems explaining that to their spouse, or whoever it might be, they got to talk to the bank about bills. And what happens is they sort of become depressed. And what we see then is if everything's really going bad, then we have to deal with the weapons. And I put they're fascinated with weapons. And basically what that means is they have a lot of weapons at home. This is the last stop. I was talking with somebody just this morning, and he mentioned that he knew somebody who had 9 weapons in his house. Within the hour, I've talked to somebody.
Wow.
So you know what I mean? You know, why does somebody have that many things? It's part of intimidation again. It keeps people on their toes. So what we need to do is to understand which ones would actually go that far. But it seems like when they're depressed, that's when they'll show back up. And we're seeing a lot of this more and more where they actually hurt somebody at the workplace and then they turn the weapon upon themselves. We saw that in Miami last week.
Absolutely.
The postal worker who shot his ex-wife.
Well, as a supervisor, because we have so many supervisors watching us this morning here, George, if you have to make that decision to let someone go, and if you're looking at these different indicators, what should a supervisor do, knowing that if I let you go, and you might be depressed about that, you might be angry at me for that, and you might have a lot of weapons at your house, how should I protect myself and the other coworkers?
Okay, basically this is not a one-person show. When we do the assessment, we need a lot of people. We need the EAP. We need to find people who know the person so we can get that history again. The most important thing we go by is the history. All these other things are good indicators, but the history is the most important thing. So we need a lot of different people. Then when we're going to bring them in to talk to them, and again, I don't think anybody wants to just lay somebody off or terminate them. What we want to try to do is deal with it. What we try to do at our facility is we always make sure we got some backup. So even if they're in talking to a management person, we make sure there's somebody available outside. So if something should happen, you know, somebody can help respond to it. You shouldn't try to do this stuff alone. Because basically it all comes down to intimidation. Okay, can we do our little role play?
I'm willing to do
We've
it.
been-
if you
we've been
want to
practicing
just
this
kind of
for-
follow me through this here. I will try.
Well, basically what we talked about the other day is if somebody is brought in for evaluation, okay, we'll take a look at, because remember we're looking at intimidation and control. So the first thing is I come in for my evaluation and you tell me what? How has been my work this year?
George, I'm really displeased with your work this year.
Okay, well see, right off the bat I'm going to become very irritated with you, and the first thing I want to do is what? Intimidate. So I'm going to say, I'm going to get you. But can I get you here?
No, I hope not.
No, because then I'm going to get into a lot of trouble, right?
Right.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for you. I'm going to wait for you when you leave.
I would try to call a security officer.
Okay, you're going to do that, okay? But
Yeah.
I'm smart enough and I wait. But as you're driving out, I remember that, you know, you've been taking martial arts. Now who's in control?
I would hope I would.
You're in control. See, and I think, gee, she's going to hurt me. So what do I need now when I get out of the car and approach you? I need a weapon. So I pull out a knife. But I forgot, you carry a gun. So you pull out a gun out of your holster.
So far I'm doing pretty well here.
So yeah, but you can see how both people back and forth, it's control. And that's how this all starts. And in most cases, it doesn't get to the weapon. It's all the threats. It can start in, Kathy, I'm going to get your kids. See? What I want you to do is I want you to become fearful of me so that you go back into the corner and I don't have to worry about you. So that's how they do it even with their coworkers. They do it with their supervisors.
And again, I think it's so important, George, if we're talking about coworkers, to be brave enough to report it to someone. Even if you, but again, it goes back to, as we talked with the commissioner and other folks earlier this morning, if I'm nervous about going to my supervisor and saying, George is kind of strange, you know, he's really intimidating, he's kind of an angry guy, is that proper?
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we try to get people to understand is we have to do it through peer pressure. Sometimes, you know, when you deal with it alone, just as I did with this role play, see, I can intimidate you alone. But if there are several people there who are saying the same thing, then that will help out.
Safety in numbers, in other words.
Safety in numbers. And even if we, you know, and there's really nothing wrong with just sitting down with the person, but if you do it alone, they're always going to intimidate you. They will control you. That's the one thing you have to remember. They know how to intimidate.
All right. Are all people at risk for violent behavior?
Yeah, everybody can become angry enough to do something real bad. But I would think to be so focused to want to hurt somebody, to go to the weapons, that would be somebody who's real angry. The other thing is it seems like they calculate it all out. They have it planned. When we follow up on the debriefing, we find out they were real calm. That was last week in Florida. The guy when he walked away, the people said, he didn't even show any anger. He was just totally calm. So they're so focused in what they want to do, and that's basically to hurt us, if that's what their final, as they see as the final goal, right?
And are you seeing this as a person who works with this day in and day out? Are we seeing more incidents of violent behavior in the workplace? And if so, why?
I think it's just our society. I have to say at our place down at St. Peter, probably we used to see a lot with clients, coming after staff. We have very few problems with that now. I think we've learned how to deal with them verbally. But I think in society it's very violent. There are more guns out there. I mean, we grew up, people might square off and punch each other. Now they don't do that. Everybody seems to have a weapon, and that's what the scary part of it is. And again, I think the threats were always there, but it just seems to be a little more serious right now.
And to keep uppermost in your mind these different indicators and to report it to your supervisor, to feel comfortable doing that.
That's correct. Always go by the indicators. What we find is that most people do not fit into just one particular indicator. They will have several of these, okay? And then use a group of people to review it and assess the person on their level of violence.
All right, and you'll be back with us in a few minutes.
I'll be back a little bit later.
All right,
Okay.
Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
I appreciate
Thank you.
it. Well, a panel discussion, as a matter of fact, is coming your way next with experts. Remember now that you're an important part of the conversation. Coming up, you will have some numbers in front of you, the fax numbers, also the phone numbers where you can call in your questions. Before we get to that panel discussion, a couple more quiz questions for you.
George, thank you for inviting me to your classroom. I have a statement I'd like you to respond to, if you will. If an individual overreacts or sees casual conversation as criticism, we should just ascribe it to them having a bad temper or a bad day. Is that a true or false statement?
I think that's a false statement. If someone's constantly overreacting to criticism or just general conversation that may be or may not be about that individual, there may be a potential for something more there and should be addressed by the organization.
Jay, good afternoon. I have a statement that I'd like you to respond to, if you would. A person who blames others excessively is a cause for concern in the workplace. Is that a true or false statement?
That's a true statement. The blaming of others and the inability to accept personal responsibility are among the most common signs of those who later commit an act of workplace violence.
Thank you.
We want to hear your questions for our panelists. As a matter of fact, they're all with us, and we have quite an array here. Again, Lieutenant Governor Joanne Benson, Don Davis, Commissioner of Public Safety, John Shabatura, who is with the Minnesota Department of Employee Relations. He happens to be the Deputy Commissioner for Labor Relations. Pete Benner with AFSCME Council 6, and we have a new addition to our panel. Darcel Lewis is with us. She's with the Minnesota Department of Employee Relations. She is the State of Minnesota Health Promotion and Safety Director, and she represents the Department of Employee Relations on Lieutenant Governor Benson's Violence Prevention Interagency Task Force. That is a mouthful, Darcel. You are a busy woman. We have a number of different questions that we've received from across the state, and so I'm just going to throw them out. And again, toss them up and feel free to interact between one another, and I'll just be the referee here. Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to start with you first. A question here. How do we create a culture of respect and compassion in the workplace?
Well, first of all, I think it has to come from two places, from the top down and from the bottom up, and we'll meet and cross in the middle and continue going. And I really think that just speaks to the fact that it is everyone's responsibility. The peacefulness of a workplace depends upon the people in it. The people in it need to know one another, support one another, and do it not only personally, but also then through our policies and make sure that they are reinforced, that they are known, and they're acted upon. And that's what this conference, of course, is about. But also the continuous reminders that we have, whether it's through an ad campaign or through just each other's behavior. It's very important too.
And Pete, how does a union fit into this?
A lot of this, I think, is us learning to walk the walk on this. If the only time management, or the workers for that matter, deal constructively with workplace violence situations are the easy ones, but when something really hard gets up or comes along, we've had difficulties with one state agency that has enforcement duties. And when some poor dairy inspector got confronted by a somewhat irate farmer with a weapon, and was not backed up, that sends a very bad message to the workers in that agency about how much violence is really going to be tolerated. If we're sending a consistent message, whether it's coworker on coworker, whether it's client or customer on employee, and the message is consistent, we treat everybody the same and intervene the same, then we're going to get a long way towards dealing with the violent situations.
I would like to mention one other thing, and it feeds right off what was just mentioned. We're talking about violence prevention in our own workplace in state agencies and departments, but I think we also have to realize that we interact with our public, with the good citizens of Minnesota, and that we need to think about how we are interacting with them as well, and so that we do that in a very dignified, peaceful kind of way, and that we understand that people sometimes don't understand, and communication is really the basis of all of it. How well do we communicate with one another so that we get the best cooperation?
Commissioner, I have a question for you. It's kind of a long one. This is coming from the handout information from Montana on page 16 indicates that local law enforcement should be contacted to attempt to gain further information about a person perceived as threatening. This is in Montana now. With this work in Minnesota, will law enforcement give any information to non-law enforcement agencies? How does that work?
It's a very general question, Kathy. However, Minnesota does have a very restrictive Data Practices Act. I think it would be the other way around. Law enforcement will come in, assist, and seek information should there be a report of violence in the workplace, and especially if it's of a criminal nature. But to just have law enforcement arbitrarily turn over something, it's a very restrictive, very difficult thing to do. If you're going through a background check, as Pete mentioned before, or George mentioned before, a person's history is a very good predictor of the future. There are those bits of information which can be acquired from a legitimate background check, but to just arbitrarily exchange information.
Call up if I'm a DNR
Right,
officer, I can't really
difficult to
call up and say, do you know anything about Don Davis?
If it's not a public history, a public criminal history, it would be very difficult to obtain.
Okay. John Shabatura, I have a question from you. This is from a caller in Dakota County. Please comment, if you would, on complacency. How can a violence prevention plan be implemented when there is a lack of commitment? Often agencies are not interested in developing and implementing a plan until an incident has occurred.
I think the key word which appears in that question is commitment. As Lieutenant Governor Benson said at the opening of this discussion, that commitment begins with the agency and from the top down as well as the bottom up. It's therefore incumbent on the top management of agencies to explicitly communicate that there is a need for a violence prevention program and that it is a work objective for managers and for supervisors, just like any other work expectation, that there will be a program in place and that it is their responsibility to help maintain a workplace environment that's free from violence, just like it's a work expectation to produce a product.
Darcel, I'd love to hear from you on this.
Well, the other thing I was going to contribute to that is the fact that what we're talking about doing is changing people's behaviors for a long term. And in order to do that, it's very important that we set examples as managers and supervisors ourselves. And again, like Lieutenant Governor said, from the top down and the bottom up. And I think that as we do that, we'll find that behavior change occurs over time. And it does take time, and that's what we're trying to do, is affect behavior change long term.
And management must also follow the same policies, and it must be consistent adherence to that. Do not have expectations for your employees that you as a supervisor or manager are not doing. That does send a complacency or a disregarding kind of message.
Pete Benner, a question from you from Century College in White Bear Lake. What about retaliation? And George and I talked about that just a little bit a couple minutes ago. What about retaliation from coworkers for reporting incidents? What is in place in state agencies to protect an employee who happens to report?
Our experience in general has been that if an employee engages in self-help, if an accused employee engages in self-help, what they're likely to do is get themselves a second hit of discipline on top of what they were going to get for the initial incident. If an employee, if a coworker comes to you and says, I'm angry at you for reporting me, you report that. And the alleged harasser is going to get hit again. And what we tell employees, when someone comes to us and says, I'm being disciplined for whatever, the first thing we say is don't engage in self-help on this. We have a grievance procedure, we have policies and procedures where you're going to get your day in court, you're going to get to do your side, give your side of the story. Don't try to help yourself. All you're going to do is dig the hole deeper.
What about protection, John, and/or Commissioner? Because I'm sensing in this particular question a little fear, obviously, about retaliation. If I report, is there someone that's going to help me, walk me to my car perhaps, or something like that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of points that I could make with respect for that. First of all, retaliation, just like violent conduct itself, is misconduct in the workplace, and it needs to be effectively communicated to employees that that is every bit as unacceptable as the violence itself. Second, it is the responsibility of management to try and establish an organizational climate where employees know and understand that not only is that behavior to be discouraged, but it is their responsibility as employees to report retaliation as well as violence when it occurs. And finally, yes, there are measures that can be taken in the individual workplace to protect employees in these kinds of circumstances. It can include escorts, providing parking closer to the building, a variety of measures dependent on the situation.
Darcel, I have about 2 minutes left. This is a question to you from Lori in Winona County. How can I obtain sample copies of workplace violence policies?
Okay, when this project originally started, Ellie Webster and myself worked together to develop guidelines for workplace violence. And as a result of that, the guidelines were distributed to all the state agencies, and I now have probably about 70 plus policies, and I have some that are very, very good and would be more than willing to share them and use them as examples or guidelines for other people to use. In addition to that, after DNR had the situation there, they are going to work more on their policy and help us determine if there's items in the policy that we've missed or items that would make our policies better. So we will be looking forward to working with them for that initiative.
Comments about working, this seems like a work in progress as we speak.
This will always be a work in progress because we'll always being in the position of having to attempt to come back to a more peaceful place. And I think, as Darcel said, is a long-term thing escalating in violence in Minnesota, and it will be a long-term coming back from it. And it takes everyday attention to it and working on this and changing your policy as needed.
Pete, final thoughts?
If state government, state management really decides that this is a priority issue, a lot can be done. When the state decided 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that sexual harassment was something that we were not going to tolerate and put serious resources and management commitment into training, into enforcement, the state has been a far better place to work for both men and women. If we do the same sort of thing for that, or for workplace violence that we did on sexual harassment and some other issues, it's going to take a while, but the state workplaces are going to be much more fun places to go to, much more secure places to go to.
Commissioner or John?
I agree with that, and again, it's ongoing, it's, I believe, proactive, it's for the benefit of all employees and our clients, and again, I would reemphasize, it's not just management down. This is a joint venture between all state employees, regardless of your position.
All right. Good panel discussion. Thank you so much. We will return, by the way, with another panel discussion later on in the program. As we've been talking, though, and we were talking about retaliation, there can be some really frightening moments when we talk about workplace violence, and fear, as you know, is such a powerful emotion. Kim Peck is with us over at the news desk right now. Kim is the Employee Assistance Consultant with the State Employee Assistance Program. Kim.
Thanks, Kathy. Whether violence is directed towards an individual or a group, the reaction of its victims follows a basic pattern. It can be said that there's a normal or typical response to events that are well outside what is perceived as normal everyday experience. However, nothing about these responses feels normal to the persons experiencing it. Almost without exception, the intensity of the reactions is well beyond one's normal range of experience. Unfortunately, because of this fact, people often feel further victimized after the acute trauma has passed because they don't understand the complex set of reactions they're experiencing. When an individual or a group experiences violence, their state of equilibrium in the world is disrupted. In many cases, their long-held worldview is destroyed, causing intense physiological, emotional, and spiritual reactions. Their world, as they've known it and experienced it, has been turned upside down. Their sense of safety and security has been shattered. In essence, they've experienced a loss of innocence, marked with intense feelings of fear or terror, profound vulnerability, and loss of control. An individual's response to trauma is instinctive. This instinctive response involves a physiological shock that's characterized by numbing sensations, immobility, or fainting, a so-called frozen fright. The instinctive response also involves a psychological response of denial or disbelief. Violence isn't within a person's normal range of reality or experience, so the mind rejects much of its frightening images. Once this frozen fright thaws and the victim begins to perceive reality, a cognitive survival state takes over. What this means is that all cognitive functions focus on one thing: survival. In this case, a person's affect will appear flat, giving the false impression that he or she isn't being seriously affected by what's happening. This cognitive survival state can last for several hours or several days. After the acute trauma has ended, victims will experience shock that the event is indeed over and that they've survived. Then depression will set in. And as the depression begins to dissipate, then severe mood swings will occur. These can include anxiety, fear, confusion, grief, guilt, and even self-blame. During this time of extreme emotional turmoil, victims are trying to reestablish some sense of equilibrium. However, they often feel that they're going crazy as they've never before experienced such a multitude of emotions. Their experience of powerlessness or loss of control often leads victims to self-blame or guilt, because believing they're in some way responsible is sometimes easier to accept than the notion that they are, in every sense of the word, innocent victims. During this period of emotional turmoil, victims will be searching for an answer to that question, why me? And will often be actively challenging their faith or spirituality. Anger typically follows the mood swings, and this anger may be overtly expressed or repressed, depending often on whether the violence is acute or chronic. Only after working through this myriad of emotion will the victims be able to reflect on the fact that they are no longer the same person as before and consider the implications for their future. The laying to rest comes when the victim accepts that his or her life has been forever changed. It's important to normalize these reactions to violence. And in spite of the fact that there may be a predictable pattern of responses, individual reactions may vary, so there needs to be tolerance, understanding, and acceptance. We must take whatever steps are possible to restore a sense of safety and control to victims of violence, and we must take these steps as quickly as possible. The recovery cycle can take days, months, and even years. Above all else, support must be made available to victims of violence. The services of the State Employee Assistance Program are available to assist employees and family members who've experienced trauma and violence at home or at work. Kathy?
Thank you much, Kim. We appreciate it. We've talked a lot about healthy and unhealthy workplaces, also some of the signs of a potentially violent personality. Coming up next, how to handle potentially violent situations. First, though, a look at those quiz questions.
Tom, it occurs to me that a certain level of intimidating and/or verbal harassing behaviors is to be expected in the workforce and that employers should not be concerned. Do you believe that's true or false?
I believe that statement is false. Any behavior such as that, be it occasional or not, is not appropriate behavior and can lead to potentially violent situations in the workplace. We should treat each other, our other employees, users, clientele with respect, and communicate well with them without using harassment behavior of any type.
Thank you. Phil, true or false? Verbal threats should be acted upon immediately and taken seriously.
Well, I believe in general that's very true, that it's important to act as quickly as possible on threats and also never to ignore them. I think that although I don't have a lot of threats directed at me personally, the kind of work I do as an appeals referee for the Department of Human Services is such that sometimes social workers and financial workers will be aware of particular service consumers who are either angry or hostile or mad at the system. And in situations like that, they tend to arrange for protection during the course of a hearing. Most often what will happen is that they will call a deputy from the Sheriff's Department either to be stationed right outside the hearing room, or sometimes they will even have a deputy right in the hearing room, depending upon the tendency of a particular individual to be violent.
Well, George Demers is back with us once again. Early on, we talked about indicators of a potentially violent personality, what we might want to look for. So let's go into something that I know a lot of our viewers are thinking about right now. What if I have to what if I'm walking into a potentially violent situation? How can I prepare myself?
Okay, I think one of the things that I'd like to address today is basically we need some training. A lot of people, a lot of agencies, they really don't want to get into this until something bad happens. Then the phone rings and everybody wants some training. And I think what we need to do is understand that early on, we need the training, we need the information on how we're going to respond, we have to practice. One of the interesting things about training and mental preparation is that when we get into a critical situation, depending on our level of training or what we know, when the actual critical incident happens, we lose 70% of our skills.
Because of fear.
Fear,
as Kim was talking about,
takes place, but everything just shuts down on us. So the more training we have, we may be apt to able to handle the situation. Otherwise, we just sit there and freeze, and then the person can hurt us, or we don't respond and get out of there. So it's really important. The more training we get, the better off we're going to be. One of the things down at our institution is that everybody's trained.
St. Peter?
Yeah, down at St. Peter, everybody's trained. That's from the CEO, all the professional people, the guards, the social work. Everybody goes through training in this, and we go through it every year. And I think one of the important things that we have to understand is, and I think somebody mentioned it in the panel discussion, is that we have to have leadership at the top. The people at the top have to believe this is important, or the people at the bottom aren't going to buy it. So we really need, wherever we go, what we're always trying to do is get somebody from management to support it, and then you need somebody in that agency or company, whatever it might be, who want to follow up with it. You have to have these two components. If you don't have it, it's not going to take place. So then you got to have good policies. And with the policies, I think it's important that when we look at them, they're competent policies. And everybody gets the information through training, what they are to do, how they're to respond.
Because it's fine to have something written down, but you have to actually act that out.
Right. You got to know how to do it. It's just like the fire drills. Well, a fireman told me one time a lot of people just burn up in buildings because they don't realize the door opens a certain way. It opens in and they're trying to push out. And very few people take fire drills seriously. Same thing with this stuff. We have to take it seriously. People have to understand it and follow through when it happens.
Okay. Let's start with mental preparation. Again, if I'm going to walk into what I think I'm not feeling too good about the situation, what should I be thinking about?
Okay, there's a couple things. You know, there's a lot of people have backup where they work. The way you're describing it right now, you're sort of alone. You may be a social worker, DNR officer, wherever it might be, out in the field, and you have to go someplace. Basically, you should always call ahead, let them know you're coming. Look for signs, you know, if they got dogs, keep out signs of probably places you don't want to enter. But let them know you're coming. Park on the side of the road so you have access to get away. Don't drive in the driveway if you're going to, because then if they block it off, you can't get away. And always back in if you got to go into somebody's driveway. These are just little things, and basically we learn a lot of these things from each other. You learn them from workshops. The police departments have a lot of little seminars they put on, and this is where you learn all this stuff. And what you got to do is you got to follow them because they're ideas and ways that are considered positive ways of handling this or doing it. Or we can do it with luck. Let me give you one example of this one. It's sort of like walking. You know, you walk alone on the trails at night?
I don't like to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
But that's one of the things, is that people, knowing that's not the correct way of doing it, competency says you do it with another person or several people. Right. But what happens is people say, nothing has happened in this neighborhood or in this area, so they do it alone. And that particular night, that's where somebody grabs them.
False sense of security?
False sense of security, but they didn't follow the rules that were set up. This holds true for the rules set up in your agencies. You got to follow the rules. If the rules say we're going to lock the back door when we're working, that's what's got to be. The door has to be locked. And we can't compromise these safety issues. But it seems like sometimes people want to take shortcuts. Well, if I don't lock it, I can go to the bathroom quicker and get back in. If it says it's supposed to be locked, you got to do it.
Again, mental preparation. And I'm thinking, can you give some hints about what should you be thinking about? Now, you mentioned those are all great, parking the pickup truck facing out of the road, that sort of thing, but should I be thinking of something if I'm a worker, a field worker, a DNR field worker, or what have you?
Yeah. Before, I should have mentioned too early on here, on page 15 through 19
Yes.
is all of the information. For those of you watching out there, you can review that after. One of the important things I think to remember is go with your intuition. You know, there's all kinds of stuff on those 4 pages, but the final decision comes down on how you want to approach it. And if you don't feel right, it doesn't look right, it's probably not right. One of the things that we have to, again, working with management, your supervisor and yourselves, we have to understand that we have to work together. If you don't feel right, you should be able to drive away without the idea that my supervisor is going to discipline me because I didn't do my job today. They have to understand sometimes it's not safe and you're going to have to go on intuition with support from the other people. Another thing that we might want to take a look at is backup. In a facility like we work at, everyone has to respond to an incident. So if something happens, we could have 20, 30 people there. Other people out in the field may not have any backup. So what they need to do is maybe work with the police departments. And if they don't feel comfortable, again, calling the police and saying, you know, would you mind, you know, kind of following me to that particular area. I think there's one thing that if I can get across today is if you're dealing with somebody who's violent or potentially violent, don't deal with them alone. That's the most important thing we can do. Always walk away, go back, get some help, then come back and deal with them.
There was a question that was brought up during the panel discussion about is there a way to get information about a potentially dangerous situation? Does that mean, can I communicate with my other coworkers about this farmer who might be, you know, upset, or how can you get that information so you know you're getting into a potentially dangerous situation?
Well, I think the commissioner said that, you know, with the data privacy, it's pretty hard. But again, now, if you feel uncomfortable going to some place, you can always call the police. Now, they can get all that information, or they may even have the history on the person, and they can at least be your backup. That's the key we have to understand. Don't do it alone, always have backup.
Can you also have someone page you? Which, of course, now we all wear pagers and beepers.
Yeah, they can page you. The problem is if when we deal with violence, somebody's going to attack you. You know, sometimes you're not going to get to your phone or whatever it might be. So I think you got to have the people there to start with. Okay. One of the other things that I'd like to mention real quickly here is what we have is if there's a problem at work or the facility is we call critical incident coordinators. And these are pretty much, it's a term used across the state now. And this is a person who works for that agency who has an aptitude for dealing with critical situations. So when we talk about reporting, working with the police, this individual, that's their particular job. They have an understanding of all of the key components to violence in the workplace, and then assess how it should be handled. So that would be a good person to go to if it's available at that particular agency. But the state, it's in the state policy, the critical incident coordinator is listed and has a definition for that individual.
We've covered a lot of ground here, George. What have we missed? We're talking about mental preparation, a little physical preparation. What's the watchword? Just be alert, trust your gut?
Be alert, look for signs. Remember, perpetrators, people who want to get us, have the advantage. Most of us have other things on our mind, and perpetrators or people who are going to commit some type of violence, they're preparing to commit the violence, and they're doing what we got to do too. We always have to be mentally prepared, understand where we're at, the lighting, where our vehicle's parked, people around us. We have to counteract what they're trying to do to us.
All right, George, you're going to join us for a panel discussion coming up shortly.
A little bit later.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Appreciate it. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, and you sure have a lot of questions, I'm sure. So please write them down. We'll try to answer them coming up in a minute or so. First, some more safety tips.
What should you do if you're in a situation that has the potential of becoming violent? One of the first things to remember is to remain as calm as you possibly can. Do not say or do anything that will elicit shame in the other person. Rage is often a response to reinforce shame. It is a defense that is used to protect oneself, to keep others from seeing one's sense of inferiority or fear. It is psychological and physiological in nature, and it protects against exposure, giving a false sense of power. Rage is different than anger is in that anger is a healthy emotional response that people experience when they feel they've been hurt by someone else. When a person is angry, they think clearly, they're in control of their actions, and they have no want to hurt the other person. In a shame-rage response, however, the person loses control and is unable to think clearly. All focus is placed on the belief that others sees the person as inferior or defective. When a person is moving into a shame or rage response, they oftentimes begin using defense mechanisms such as blaming, shaming, or judgment. As the stress increases from the situation, the response will move into rage. Therefore, it's really important to try to de-escalate the situation. Be as calm as you can when talking to the person. Do not be judgmental. Do not be shaming. Don't say things like you're making a fool of yourself. You're going to be sorry for doing this. Instead, use phrases like, I can understand you're feeling angry, Ray. I'd feel that way if this was happening to me too. Or, I know you're a good person, Ray, and I know that you don't want to hurt me. What can we do to resolve this situation? Some of the things to remember if you're ever in a situation that has the potential of becoming violent is to remain calm, size up the situation, and make a plan for escape. Be aware of your physical surroundings. If possible, stand at a right angle to the person and en route of an escape route. Speak slowly and calmly, confidently and assertively, but not loudly. Do not talk down to the other person. Don't be judgmental. Be careful of not shaming or threatening the other person. Be aware of your body language and the words that you choose. Respond rather than react to the other person. Make eye contact, but don't make this prolonged. Use I statements, such as, I can understand this has been a very difficult time for you, Ray. Do not make sudden gestures. Do not conceal your hands. Place your hands on your hips or cross them in front of you. Let the person express his or her anger. Nod your head and acknowledge what is being said if appropriate. Don't get hooked into arguing or defending yourself for past actions. Don't take what the person is saying personally. Never make promises you can't keep. Point out choices and ask for recommendations, repeating what you hear the person saying. Keep your body posture as relaxed as comfortable, but be ready to run if need be. The following is a videotape done by Vicki Sanders and Doug Kasulke, demonstrating a situation in which an employee has the potential of becoming violent.
Doug, I'm glad you could come in today.
What's up?
Well,
What's going on?
I just wanted to discuss with you a couple of things. It seems that I've received some disturbing reports about some threats that you made.
What do you mean reports? Is that what that says?
Well, Doug,
Who's been saying this? I want to know who's making these allegations.
well, I'm not at liberty right now. Why don't you have a seat? We discuss it further.
You tell me what's going on here.
Sure, have a seat, Doug.
This is all a bunch of crap. I
Right.
work with a bunch of stinking idiots.
Well, Doug, it's that type of
What are they saying?
language. What I need you to do is to change the way that you talk to employees. You got
Well, now it's the way I talk to people.
right. The way that you talk.
This just keeps going downhill, boy.
Doug, we've changed our.
Can't say anything anymore.
We changed our policy. What we need you to do is not to talk in a negative manner to employees, not to be threatening them. You can't use physical.
I've never hurt anybody.
Well, it doesn't matter. You hurt people by inhibiting their freedom.
And you can't say anything anymore. How am I supposed to get those idiots to do their jobs?
Doug, do you remember the sexual harassment
Boy, what a joke.
training that we had
And
a
you
while
can't
back?
say anything because someone will interpret it wrong.
Well, same thing with violence. People can interpret violent statements in the wrong manner. So you got to be very careful what you say and how you say it to employees. Now, what I need you to do is look at our policy and begin to follow it, and follow it in a manner that you are not making physical threats in order to get the employees to do things for you.
But what is, let me see the policy. What does it say?
Sure, okay. Now you notice this line here. It says the department will not tolerate violence in, on, or around department premises, owned, leased, or operated, nor any off-site work locations, either by or against employees or members of the public. That protects you also, Doug. That means that nobody can do violent statements against you. Clients can't come against you.
Did you notice how Vicki remained calm in this situation? She stayed in charge, and when Doug suddenly jumped up, an indicator that he might be moving into rage, Vicki stood up also. She maintained eye contact and talked to Doug in a non-shaming and confident manner. Doug's defenses went down and he calmed down, which de-escalated the situation. What should you do if someone brings a weapon into the workplace? The most important thing to do is to try and leave the premises immediately. If you find yourself trapped in the situation, follow these suggestions. Stay calm. If the person senses you are losing control, it will most likely escalate the situation. Avoid rushing the individual. Attempting to disarm the person is extremely dangerous. Focus on the individual, not on the weapon. Negotiate. Try to get small yeses from the person. Start with simple requests such as, is it okay for me to take a deep breath? The more yeses you get, the more of a chance you'll have that the person won't use the weapon. Step back. Try to negotiate permission to take at least 3 steps away from the individual. The increased distance will reduce the person's anxiety and the accuracy of the weapon if it is used. Buy time. The longer you can talk to the individual, the less likely they are to use the weapon. By taking a proactive approach, we can significantly decrease the possibility of violence occurring within the workplace. Every member of the workplace should understand that what violence is, know that this type of behavior will not be tolerated, and be familiar with violence in the workplace policies, procedures for reporting concerns and incidents, and crisis response procedures. An assessment of risk factors, the building layout, furniture placement, and escape routes should be conducted with necessary changes incorporated. If the culture of the workplace is an unhealthy one, immediate steps need to be implemented to begin creating systemic change. In many cases, it will be feasible to have a neutral third party assist with facilitating team building, training employees in conflict management, and dealing with people who act disrespectfully. The Make the Peace campaign makes the following recommendations for creating a respectful workplace. If you're a supervisor, consider your management style. Is it fair and respectful, or do you bully to get your way? Be accessible, not intimidating, so your employees won't be afraid to come to you with concerns. Be a problem solver, not a avoider. Communicate your concerns to those around you as well as your gratitude. Be cautious in your judgment and your blame of others. Foster a sense of pride in the workplace. Always treat others the way you would like to be treated. When someone on staff is experiencing problems, encourage him or her to seek help without recrimination. If you're an employee, don't just complain about or trash others. If you're upset about something, confront the source in a direct and helpful manner. Consider whether your actions help or hurt the work environment around you. If you don't feel safe in the workplace, tell your supervisor about it. If your supervisor is the problem, tell his or her supervisor. Be quick to help your coworkers and slow to judge them. Whoever you are, keep your sense of humor, take responsibility for your behavior, value everyone's contribution. Remember that workplace problems can affect your home life and vice versa. Get the support you need to do the best you can in both situations. Respect different ways of working. Respect different classes, gender, and races. Encourage others to do the same. Remember, you're the one who can make the peace.
Carol Sullivan, good job. Thank you very much. Well, coming up next, more Q&A, question and answer with our panel of experts. But first, remember those safety tips I told you about earlier? Well, here they are.
If you're leaving the office late at night, try to use an escort service. If that's not possible, it's a good idea to have your door key in your hand before you walk out the door. As you approach your car, try to make sure if it's in the same condition it was when you left. When working at off-site locations, it's a good idea to heed no trespassing signs. If you need to meet with a property owner, perhaps they'd be willing to meet you on public property. And when off-site in someone's home or someone's property, trust your judgment. If something doesn't feel right, it's usually best just to leave and contact your supervisor.
You're the one who watched the children, who lived with the neighbor who had lost her job, which made her so mad that she needed a break instead of a drink. So she talked with her husband and told him her fears, which helped her relax and hunt for a job, which paid their bills, which lowered their stress and saved her from rage. You're the one who can make the peace.
Well, we've heard we have a lot of questions, and so we have a panel of experts that will answer those questions for you. Joining us once again, Kim Peck. And right next to Kim, Carol Sullivan. George Demers is with us as well. Doug Kasulke joins us. Now, you saw Doug in that role playing. Doug is with the Minnesota Department of Human Services. He's a security counselor at the Minnesota Security Hospital in St. Peter for 22 years. Is that right? You and George obviously know each other pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
He's a trainer in safety and security for law enforcement corporations and public agencies. He also is an expert in hostage negotiation and critical incident stress debriefing. Right next to Doug is Vicki Sanders, and you saw Vicki also as well in that role-playing. Vicki's with the Department of Labor and Industry, and she's the State of Minnesota Workplace Violence Prevention Coordinator. Did I get that right?
Yep.
All right. A lot of questions here. George, I'm going to throw the first one to you. It's from St. Paul. This deals with confrontations with members of the public, which many of our viewers can get into every so often because they have a lot of public interaction. At times, we deal with the public who are angry for whatever reason. The anger has nothing to do with our responsibility. So how do you handle something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Basically, one of the things I think we need to do is we got to learn to negotiate. We have to be able to talk. And Carol mentioned in her segment to stay calm. That's probably the most important thing. Don't put them off, but just listen. One of the important things that we have to remember is that probably 85 to 90% of all conflicts can be resolved by talking. So that's what the people out there need to know today. If we talk, most of these things we can resolve. And besides staying calm, remember time's on your side. Sometimes people are in a rush to end it. Hey, look, it's not my problem. I would rather, just pass it on to somebody. Take your time and deal with it, and maybe the person will calm down.
Doug, do you have any other words of advice for this?
Yeah, I would agree with what George is saying. Let time take its course. Too many times we're in too much of a hurry for a quick resolution to the conflict. We bypass a lot of safety issues, but it takes a lot of energy to be angry. And I think, if you let time take its course, people just normally will calm down.
But what happens, even if you think time's on your side, and if it isn't, then what? I mean, if things just keep escalating and escalating, then what? What's good advice for someone watching today?
Well, I know George has talked about it too. I think one of the things that you need to remember is to get other people involved as quickly as possible. That could make all the difference in the world.
Question to Kim from Bob in Duluth. Would you discuss, please, how the fitness for duty exam may be used before, during, and even after a violent act?
Well, the issue around fitness for duty exams is one that we address often at the Employee Assistance Program. And unfortunately, when it comes to our attention, it's often, in our opinion, thought of too late. where the employer is dealing with a situation that is volatile and are hoping that somehow magically an evaluation can be done to determine what are the risks with this individual. And as we've heard discussed earlier this morning, we really need to take a step back and take a look at the culture of the workplace and take action long before a fitness for duty evaluation is considered. Now, certainly if there are some of the indicators, as George described in our session earlier this morning, then I think that is an appropriate option. But it's important to remember that all the answers aren't going to be provided in a fitness for duty evaluation. That if an employer is looking for a guarantee of will this person be violent or not, they're never going to get that. So they have to take, again, that step back and look at the bigger picture and say, what can we do to create a healthier, safer environment overall?
And Carol, you're nodding your head in agreement over here.
Definitely.
George, comments about this as well? There's really no guarantee.
No, there's never any guarantee. What you have to do then, you have to put your safety nets up around your agency that if the person has been sent off to therapy, taken some time off from work, and we don't want them around until they're, they feel they're fit to come back to work. They may not be allowed in the building. So if they show up again, you have to have procedures on how you're going to deal with them.
Vicki, I don't want to leave you out. Do you have anything to add to this?
I think, again, that it probably is one of the last steps. One of the first steps is just to recognize the warning signs of progressive or escalating behavior differences that the employee is displaying.
Carol, we have a question to you from Bob in St. Paul. When talking on the phone with an individual from the general public now, what is the best way to end the conversation quickly, yet not doing more to upset the individual?
Well, I think it's really important to remain calm and not get hooked into arguing with a person. Give the person some factual information. If possible, make a referral, and then just tell the person firmly that you need to get off the phone and get back to work.
Without hanging up abruptly or
Right.
losing your cool.
Right.
All right. How about a question, I think, to Kim here. Why does it seem that most of the violence that occurs in the workplace seems to be a result of family relationships, family violence, domestic abuse?
Well, I don't know that I would agree with that assessment, but certainly I think as people manifest violent or threatening behaviors in the workplace, it probably suggests overall the lack of skills that they have in managing conflict. And again, that's why it's so important for an employer or for the workplace as a whole to be watching for those initial signs and indicators that a person may not lack the requisite skills or ability to de-escalate or to manage conflict. Anytime you have more than one person in a room, there's going to be conflict. So we can't make the assumption that just because people are at work and are successful in their job, that they know how to manage conflict effectively. So again, employers have a responsibility to provide training and to provide resources for people to develop those skills. And if they are dealing with violent situations or threatening situations at home, certainly it is going to affect them at work. But the employer can be supportive overall in providing resources and skills for people to know how to manage conflict more effectively.
Kind of a philosophical question here, statement actually. This is from John in St. Paul. We hear so many messages in this country that promote violence. Clearly, we all know that. Examples, movies where the bad guys are killed, or radio commercials that stress beating the competition. I see that the solution, John's solution, is stressing the good in everyone and learning to stress cooperation, not competition. Kind of a philosophical thing to toss around here this morning. What do you all think of that? Especially when it comes right down to what we've been talking about all morning long here.
I think the Make the Peace campaign exemplifies what he's trying to say. And even this video, because what it has done is taken violence prevention practitioners from across the state together for one purpose, and that's to provide information and educate the public of the resources that are available for violence prevention. So one agency and one person can't solve the problem. It's going to have to be a cooperative effort.
I'm curious here, this is also another question which I think, Vicki, you might want to take a shot at, and then please, everyone else chime in. In your opinion, what role does racism play in workplace violence?
I think it's just an example of disrespect of a person. Racism or any type of prejudice against a person because of culture and nature. As far as violence prevention, I think it's very important not to stereotypify a person because of your own fears about a person's culture, background, or the way that they live their lifestyle.
If I could add to that,
Sure.
As much as an employer may be tempted, Employers are never in a position to mandate how a person is going to think or what their attitudes are, but they have every responsibility, again, to manage behavior. So when it's evident that people are behaving in a disrespectful way towards others because of they represent a particular class or what have you, again, the responsibility is there to say, we don't tolerate this kind of behavior. People will maintain or will hold on to whatever attitudes or biases they have as much as we might like that to change. So again, our role is to support and manage behaviors so they are respectful and help to create a safe work environment.
When you talk about managing behaviors, this is a question from Dave in Bemidji, which kind of, it's a nice little segue. What is the best way to correct an employee who has hostile tendencies, Carol and or George?
It's important, first of all, to be prepared ahead of time. If you're going to be disciplining an employee that has acted out previously, I think it's important to know what you're going to say, to have someone else in the room, have security alerted in case there's a problem. When you look at the video that Vicki and Doug did, Vicki did a wonderful job of dealing with Doug in that situation.
You did.
And I think that that's what people need to do, and also be prepared and have a list of referrals for counseling or whatever is necessary.
George?
Just quickly on that, I would say don't take it personal.
Mm-hmm.
You got to
That's
stay
so hard to do,
yeah,
to not do.
But I think that's the most important thing we can do is just listen. Don't take it that they're attacking you. Even though they may be, you got to let it go through one ear and out the other. That's the most important thing we can do with verbal communications. I know it seems hard, but you just got to do it.
Doug?
I guess I would just add to that a little bit, just that you try to deal with it at the lowest level possible, that you don't let it fester, that you don't let it continue. If you deal with small issues first, hopefully there's small consequences. But if you let the thing go and the thing festers for a long period of time, usually the consequences are going to be a lot greater because the violence is going to be greater. So try to deal with it at the lowest level possible.
Well, I have you here. I have a question from Susan in St. Paul directed to you, Doug. I have some concerns about my building security. What can an individual do about this?
Well, that's a loaded question. I know a lot of the information's already been given. Maybe I can just recap on some of the things that we've already talked about. I think one of the things as individuals, your awareness is probably the most important issue that we have to deal with. You need to be aware of your environments. You need to know where you're vulnerable. You need to know the type of clients that you're going to be coming in contact with. So you always have to be on your toes, always constantly remembering where you are, who you're dealing with. That's very important. I think attitude goes along with awareness. To be a secured facility takes a lot of work, and I think you have to have an attitude that, first of all, security is important, and that you have a positive attitude towards security. I can enter in policies are important, and as individuals, we need to follow those policies and procedures, because if you don't, they're really useless to you. So there's a lot of different areas. Reporting we talked about was very important. I can go on and on and on. And in being involved too.
There's so much to cover too.
Yeah.
I'm sensing you want to say
No,
something, George.
I do want to say something.
Go ahead.
And I don't have the telephone number. Maybe Vicki can help. But one of the things we talked about is what can we do out there because of the violence in society. And over at Ellie Webster's office, do you have an 800 number off the top of your head?
No.
Maybe somebody can sneak it into us.
All right. We'll
But
see.
what we need is the 800 number. But she has a lot of good information, pamphlets that can be used in your organization to be handed out. And it all talks about being positive in your work environment and avoiding violence. So it's something that maybe we can get a number.
We'll try to get that number here before we actually go off the air. Thank you so much. There was a lot of information that we covered in a very brief period of time. But of course, the responsibility is not only with your supervisor, but also with yourselves, co-workers, and when it goes, as we were talking about, and here's this number. Ask and ye shall receive. It's not an 800 number. I have a 612-296-2407 or 67. That's what happens when you're writing fast. 612-296-2407. That's a 0. There you go. We're high tech here. Thank you, panelists, so very much. I appreciate your time. I've learned an awful lot the past few hours here, couple hours. Well, I want to thank everyone on the panel for answering questions from our viewing audience, and to thank all of our presenters and program sponsors who made this broadcast possible. We've heard today that preventing violence in our workplace and in our community is everyone's responsibility. When it comes to violence, we are all connected, our work sites and our homes, customers and employees, city streets and country roads. Stress at work affects our home life, and violence in the community spills over into the workplace. What happens to one of us happens to all of us. If you need more information on this topic, several resources are listed on page 20 in your handout materials. Now, turn to page 22 in your handout. There are 3 questions for discussion. As we end this broadcast, we hope you will discuss your answers to these questions with the other participants at your site. Also, please remember videotapes of this broadcast will be available by contacting your agency training office or the Department of Labor and Industry. I'm Kathy Wurzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, and remember, you're the one who can make the peace.